before, and that was in your conversation ahead of reopening, when we were just putting the final touches to our guidelines, and you were talking about how you as a community would respond. And I learned so much from, to be fair, eavesdropping, but listening in. And it's nice to be back now, many months later, having reopened, closed, but successfully. So it's good to be back. So, of course, just onto the topic of tonight, that question about what society and community will look like when all of this ends is the conversation that we've all been having with friends and colleagues over months. And of course, the conversation never stays the same. So as time passes, we've learned more, we've made new observations, and we reach different conclusions each time we have the conversation. So I just wanted to open on a note of humility, recognizing that this is the conversation of this moment, of this rather cold, bleak January evening. And in January 2021, and we only know what we know now, and there's a high chance that if we were to watch this back in January 2022, we'd laugh and shake our heads and say, little did we know. And that's a reality. But having said that, we can't shy away from the big questions. And so tonight, we're going to have a go at addressing them, because we both, in our own roles, and all of us in our community roles, have to begin to plan for the months and years ahead. Before we look forward, Rabbi Schochet, I wanted to look back, actually. So over the whole period of the pandemic, back from March, and wondered if you would share with me some of your reflections from that period. I'm interested, really, I suppose, to know what were the standout moments that had an impact on your thinking.
What I've come to discover more than anything during this whole period, going back already to March, is that, rabbis always find themselves preaching about the need to dig deep. And a lot of the time that we're engaged in various different forms of motivational speaking, etc. And certainly when I find myself, wherever I am on a speaking circuit, it's one key theme that I tend to continuously hammer home about, and that is the need to discover inner strengths, what we often talk about, the latent potential within, et cetera, et cetera. And, when you have to put your money where your mouth is, it's a game changer. And it's amazing about how one comes to discover certain unique inner strengths or talents or creativity that they will never have necessarily had to confront before. It was never the case that one ever imagined needing to run Jewish life online. It was always the case. You come into shul, you be creative in the type of sermon you're going to give, you'll be creative in the various different types of programs that you're going to put on offer. And essentially, most shuls, it's much of a muchness, different speakers, different topics. We've done some pretty creative things in Mill Hill over the years. Perhaps arguably one of the more creative things that is different to most other shuls, which the United Synagogue was incredibly supportive with, was the Israel Engagement Hub, which I set up with Orly Lang from the community, which was focused uniquely and specifically about Israel and bringing in Israeli speakers, and those things were uniquely successful. But comes the pandemic and everything shuts down, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, now what? And the brain goes into overdrive, and suddenly having to dig deep and figure out how you're going to be creative. What are you going to do different? You need to still engage your community. And for the first time ever, I think I found myself, again, as I said, having to put my money where my mouth is, because my mouth was 27 or so years ago when I was inducted into Mill Hill Shul, preaching about how it's never about the numbers game, about how many people you bring through your doors, but even more so about taking the shul, the community, out to the people. And as much as I preached it at the time, I mean, to what extent can you really bring the community out to the people? It was always the case of getting people in for different sorts of events. It doesn't matter why they come in, whether they are regular shul goers or whether they are JFK, that is just for Kiddush, or whatever other reason besides. But all of a sudden now, for the first time, it was really about taking the community, the shul, out to the community, because everybody had to stay in their homes. So in the first instance, it was all about being creative with online programming and about what I can come up with, what I can think about, what we can do, what can keep people engaged, what's going to speak to people, what's going to engage, what's going to enthrall people, what will make them want to come back online. That was the starting point. And then, of course, when you hit the Chagim, you have to start thinking about how are you going to make this work. Many people were very creative with regards to Pesach and having Seder in a box. The United Synagogue was quite incredible in that regard. preparing those boxes to be able to be brought to various members and so forth. Came Shavuot. Everything that we would normally have done on Shavuot and Shul, we did online and more. By definition, we had a whole Leil Limud, a whole study evening online with different speakers. We had 7 or 8 different lady speakers, and each one shared on a particular theme, etc. It was really interactive, engaging, etc. We had a drive-by cheesecake distribution. So we had bags that my wife, Honey, and I prepared, and my 2 daughters stood outside with long sticks and hooks at the end, so there should be the social distance, sticking them into people's car doors, etc., etc. Again, it's different. It's unusual. Did we ever normally distribute cheesecake? No. You came to Shul, you got your cheesecake. Then came Rosh Hashanah. Now what? Oh, there was a particular challenge because there was a mitzvah of shofar. Some people came to Shul, and all the power and all the credit to them. Most did not, and understandably the concerns, etc. And so it was a case of being creative, being innovative. And here I do a shout out to Marshall Hoffman, who is really the head of Mill Hill CST, but together with me and our Shul chairman, Paul Charney, we walked 19 stops, 13 miles, blowing shofar for about 1,500 people. It was incredible. It was unbelievably uplifting. Came home, it meant, I hasten to stress, literally, because it was only, I dare say, thank God, 1 day of shofar blowing. And it meant missing my whole afternoon with my family, the meal, etc. Came home at 6 o'clock. I said, right, what do we do next? What do we do for Simchat Torah, which is the next occasion of many people coming together? And my daughter Esther turned around and said, well, now do the same thing again with the Sefer Torah. Carrying a Sefer Torah for 13 miles is more of a challenge, but all right, we did it for about 7 miles, 13, not 19 stops. We wheeled the Sefer Torah in a stroller. It always tickled me when every time I was pushing a stroller, people are looking excited. Okay, what's the rabbi about to do? And you suddenly open up the talit and out pops the Sefer Torah, even though they thought it was a baby wrapped in a talit in the stroller. Why, I don't know. But, and again, dancing on the streets, just in front of the people, letting them have the opportunity to see the Torah, to get some semblance of Simchat Torah. And then replicating that again with Hanukkah, putting a menorah on the back of a truck, driving it around. So community spirit was absolutely incredible. The throngs that actually came out and the many people that chose to engage, Rosh Hashanah, Simchat Torah, Hanukkah, was absolutely incredible. And it just goes to show, at least I believe, and those for me have been the standalone moments where I know that the community remains engaged. I know the community is always continuously thirsting for community involvement. And that gives me a lot of hope for the future, that regardless of whatever the challenges we're going through right now, when the moment provides itself, we will all be back together celebrating, except that we'll have to figure out how some of this we will continue going forward.
Thank you. You know that you and I share an enthusiasm for doing shul and community outside of the shul walls. It's a particular, it's funny actually, almost identically, it's something I've banged on about in my role. Shul in public space, doing community and public spaces and other spaces, but actually probably never really pushed the boat too far. And now we've seen what we've been able to achieve with that. And I'd like to come back to that later in the conversation, actually, when we talk about the future. But it's been remarkable to watch what you've done in Mill Hill, and good on Esti, because I didn't realize that was where the idea for Simchat Torah came from. I just to pick up also on the point about resilience and digging deep and all of that. It's not just that you, rabbis, and this is my perspective from my role, it's not just that rabbis and rebbitzins and lay leaders had to come up with these new ideas, but everything changed month on month. So you'd put a plan in place and you'd have everything ready, and then the government would throw everything up in the air and we'd have to start again. And that's okay to do in a crisis. I think like in March, March to June, March to July, you kind of think that's all quite manageable. But March to January, we're still in it. We're still changing the lines are being redrawn all the time. That's really extremely hard. I feel bad now because you spoke so very positively. I'm going to go right back to the beginning because if it's okay with you, I'm going to describe a couple of moments for me, please, with your permission.
Yeah, please do.
So mine are a bit less, they're a bit more thoughtful and a bit less positive. But I think that the things that stand out. The first one is really from that week that we decided that we must close shuls. And you'll remember that the chief rabbi and the trustees made that decision ahead of the government on the basis of pikuach nefesh, and we simply didn't know enough about the virus. And over the course of a few days, we'd been just writing and rewriting guidance. We'd say, use hand gel for Kiddush, no, stop the Kiddush, stop the activity for senior members, no, stop all activity, just davening. And then we started to hear about more and more of our members who had COVID, not from shul, just round and about, and we weren't able to access the right advice. And so in many ways, as difficult as it was exceptionally difficult to shut shuls. It was a relief because we needed to keep people safe. But that first Friday night, which seems a long time ago now, at the end of the week, we held our first online Kabbalat Shabbat. That was the US one was led by Johnny Turgle, and it was pre-United Synagogue US TV, and it was streamed as this is on the Facebook page. And I was in my kitchen, last minute cooking for Shabbats, which is no surprise at all. And I was captivated by the davening, but also by the comments that were popping up underneath. So it was saying, Shabbat Shalom to all from Chigwell, Shabbat Shalom from Edgware, the Jacobs family of Belmont wish you good Shabbos. And I just couldn't stop watching them because I realized that something it seems obvious now, but then it wasn't. Something quite beautiful was happening. It had been such a hard week, and the United Synagogue had closed its shuls for the first time ever, but we'd instantaneously built this new online community, and that was quite powerful. And I think that night they got something like 1,300 views, and they got 8,000 views since. But in the kitchen, amongst friends, I have to admit to shedding a tear that night, because it showed that, you can shut buildings, but you don't shut communities. And there was a real beauty in the United Synagogue and our family of communities. And it was clear we needed to build on that. And of course, my wonderful colleagues, Richard Verba and David Nielsen and others, have done that in creating US TV, which shares content across all US communities and is a real game changer.
Well,
with your permission,
I was going to say, Richard's going to be a little bit annoyed with me because I've been a little bit slow in properly connecting to the Facebook page, but it's finally happened. And you're right. Everything you say is right. And I just want to, there was nothing you said that was negative, so I'm not sure how you put a damper on anything I said, other than to add that, because we've had this conversation, this is the third lockdown. First lockdown, like you say, it was like suddenly everybody having to bunker down, everybody joins together, the first Kabbalat Shabbat. And I think you might, admittedly, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, find this in US as well. You'll get, I don't know, the first Kabbalat Shabbat, the first many Kabbalat Shabbat, or Kabbalot Shabbat, whatever the word is, we found to have literally over 100 screens. Currently, okay, granted, it's also an early Friday, but we're down to only about 30, 35 screens, which may be about 60, 70 people, which is still good, I hasten to stress. And this week we decided, okay, we're going to up our ante a little bit. So we're going to bring my wife, Honey, into the whole Kabbalat Shabbat to do a little taster of Shabbat. She's going to talk for about 3-4 minutes with an actual presentation on gefilte fish after we're done the Kabbalat Shabbat. But the point is that there is what they call Zoom fatigue. The point is that people get a little bit fed up. People are just, okay, what, we have to do that again? I did it once. It was exciting at the beginning. I did it second lockdown. It was also not bad. Third time, really? Come on. And yet against that, I can tell you that I was in your neck of the woods this afternoon in Borehamwood because I went with my wife to see an old lady through her window, an elderly lady. Nebuch, for the last 2 months being home alone, couldn't get access to her walker that was literally in the boot of her car just outside her window. But be that as it may, she gave me the keys. I opened it up and I stuck her walker through the window. And then we decided on a whim on the way home, 2 blocks away, to randomly stop. Well, first there's Just Kosher or whatever it is. And just on that same street, I know of a family that lived there that are members of the shul. So I knocked on the door. And the guy's like, Rabbi. Like, people see the rabbi turning up. It's a bit like, I don't know, last rites, you panic. But then over the next 20 minutes of conversation, you suddenly realize, wow, people just love it. People still want to connect. People feel so enthralled by it. And I really think it bodes well for the future. I think that as much as some might right now feel a little bit apathetic, ultimately, the moment we open those doors, they'll all come running back. And I don't see anybody sitting here nodding their head saying, you're so wrong, Rabbi. So hopefully I'm right.
Yeah, we do share that optimism. Again, I might talk about that a bit later, right? But I do in general community is about people. People crave social connection. That's what community provides. I know Mill Hill provides in ordinary times, provides multiple ways of bringing people together, and they will come back for that. There's lots of challenges we can talk about, but I do believe that fundamentally. We're going to talk a bit about what we've learned, a little more about what we've learned. And this isn't a Jewish contribution, but was also something that happened quite early on that really framed my thinking for this period, which is that I think it was definitely after Pesach, so it was in April. So it was the time when we were starting to look forward. So it was just at the time when I was convening a group of people to think about how on earth are we going to reopen the shuls. And I was out for a morning walk, because that's what you could do, right? And I was listening to Thought for the Day, and it was Reverend Sam Wells. And he spoke about going back to normal. And I've thought about it in the context, it came back to me in the context of this evening's conversation, because he wondered why that was why everyone was talking about going back to normal, because was everything in January, let's say, was everything so perfect? Was it also great that we were desperate to go back to the life that was in January, or was this just really nostalgia? And he pointed out quite obviously that you can never go back. The only thing for certain we know is that everything in the future is new, right? It will never be the same as the past. And in fact, it's hardly an aspiration to wish to go back. So at that point, he was saying we'd been given this kind of once in a century invitation to imagine something better and richer and different. Now, look, there was a lot of optimism then, and we're not quite in the same frame of mind as we were in April. But certainly that no going back has been my guiding message all the way through this. We have changed as people, we've changed as society, and we've changed as communities. And just as all of those have changed, so our community life will never be the same. So I think that for me, that's also framing the kind of conversation I'd like to have now, is to look at some aspects of our community's life and communal provision, and try and work out how things might change or what we've learned. Now you're the rabbi, so I think it will be fair to ask you a little about prayer. It's been a weird time for prayer, because we've had these months of davening at home, or not davening, maybe. Online minyanim, this very socially distant style of davening that we've had with the masks and the ventilation and the gloves and all of those things that you know very well. We had some new stuff that we tried out over Yamim Noraim, and also in the summer, and you had them in Mill Hill, right? The garden minyanim, so the very successful kind of boutique minyanim that took place in people's gardens. And so I'm interested to know, with all of these new experiences, what you have learned or your kind of thoughts about tefillah.
So let's get a little bit controversial here, if I may, because it was in the media not recently about a certain presentation, I believe, that took place at Limud, where the suggestion was that essentially our synagogues will become defunct, at least as synagogues. They will become effectively community centers for other programmings, etc., suggesting that prayer in and of itself, it's kind of gone out the window on the back of everything that we've endured. And I will say this, I will say that going into shul with a mask and the gloves and the whole spiel became incredibly tedious, and yes, turned a lot of people off from coming, coupled, and I think more than anything, with the inability to sing, which is what everybody loves to join in with. That definitely impacted very negatively and resulted in much more limited numbers. And even when we were restricted to the online services, I will hold my hands up. And I will say it straight. We did it during lockdown 1, and we did it daily, and we did it well. We actually are probably the only show that didn't have not 1, but 2 services, because even online, everybody has to have a service that they don't go to. And on lockdown 2, we actually initiated this as well, and we still continue with 2 services. Lockdown 3, I'm going to hold my hands up. I lost cheshek. I thought to myself, okay, shuls in theory are still open, so those who need to say Kaddish will find an open shul. And as far as anyone else who wants an online prayer service, instead of having 2, let them go to just the 1. So we don't need the 2, they'll go to the 1, etc. I have not been going to that 1, and If I want to get a service, Edgeware United is open, but I don't go because if I tell my community you shouldn't really be coming to shul, it's rather hypocritical for me to then be going to shul. If it's not safe, it's not safe. But I just choose, instead of going online, that Rabbi Rose, my associate rabbi, runs, I daven on my own. I have my set time. I still get up. I still daven at 7:30, and I find my own personal prayer meaningful for me. Call me selfish, I don't know. I just lost Keshik on the online experience for the third time running. Having said that, all of a sudden this week I received a couple of different messages. One of them saying I need to go to work at 8 o'clock. Can we do the 7:30? Somebody else saying at 8 o'clock they don't do the special Kaddish procedure that you initiated. Can we go back to doing a 7:30? So I have to reconsider my position because it's no longer about me again. It's other people who want something different, and I have to be there to cater for their needs. Putting that aside, prayer itself is a fundamental component, an absolute constituent of Jewish living and Jewish life. Take prayer out of Judaism, and you are literally missing one of the three legs of the tripod upon which Judaism stands. Our sages famously tell us Judaism stands on three pillars: Torah, study of Torah values, etc. Gimilut chasadim, which is acts of kindness and benevolence. You take any of those two away, obviously, what is Judaism? What's left? But also avodah, which by definition means prayer. Prayer is a fundamental part of all of Jewish living and existence. And the hard fact is that we all turn to prayer in times of need, and we are now in a collective time of extreme need. So prayer still remains an absolute component. Prayer is something that everybody feels that they connect with to one extent or another. And sometimes, yes, they'll come into shul and they'll sit there for 2 hours, and maybe they'll end up praying for all of about 5 minutes and speak the other 1 hour and 55 minutes. But so what? Those 5 minutes are what that individual needs and what are required for that particular person to last them, if you will, till the following week. And I think that to suggest that synagogues are going to become more like community centers, or there's no point and purpose any longer to the actual prayer component of the synagogue, is at best gross naivete, and to be oblivious to how fundamental prayer always was, is, and always will be to all of Jewish life and living.
So it has been really interesting to follow. Thank you for that very full answer. It has been really interesting to follow the debate in the papers, and we have contributed this week, underlining the importance of prayer. And I think it was very interesting. I'm surprised that statement was made, to be honest. I've been quietly fascinated by the popularity of online services. I don't know to what extent it's about the tefillah or it's about seeing familiar faces or routine, but they have been popular. And then certain services, so for example, the Women's Hallel that have been running, Women's Hallel programs that have been run, tefillah that's been running, for example, has been super popular. And it's something quite different that otherwise women would not have been davening, I suspect, would not have been saying Hallel, many of the people there. But it's the online channel makes it more accessible, but I'm also not going to be too rosy about it. I think that many people have got out of the habit of davening. To use the Grose as an example, we were very good at the beginning at talking at davening on Friday nights and Shabbat as a family, and it's hard over time when you don't have the prompt of the routine and the shul and Shabbat and other people and inspiring daveners and an educator and a program. It's hard to keep that stuff up, and there will be many people that are out of routine.
But they'll always get back into routine, right? In other words, if we were Yom Kippur next week, for argument's sake, and we did a prayer service for an hour before with Yisker and whatnot, they'll come out in droves.
Yes, they will. And I do believe that. And we learned so much, I think, from the UNRM experience. The fact that communities had to find this way to deal with being over capacity and running shorter services and focused services. We had such good feedback across communities for the way that we kind of reimagined and broke things down. Those services that were more intense, so we say daven at home and then come in and have a communal experience, whether that's the highlights where people were singing or whether not people weren't singing, their worst song, there was all the tunes that you like, or whether that it was there was a focus on learning, or there was a sermon and some davening, they were received really well. And we need to listen hard to that feedback and incorporate it not just into Yom Noraim, but into our regular Shabbat services, Friday night or Shabbat. There's a lot to learn from that.
Can I just forgive me? Can I just interject there?
Yeah.
I actually think therein lies the point. So all of a sudden, Shabbat services were, even if you start a little bit later on in the actual prayer book, but services were all of a sudden, well, instead of starting at 9:15 and finishing at 11:45, and I was always adamant 11:45, 2.5 hours, all of a sudden we were starting at 9 o'clock and we were done by 10:30. 2.5 hours got cut to 1.5 hours. Why can't we do that when we get back to normal as well? Why do services have to be schlepped out? They don't. We've now proven that, and that's the way it's got to be going forward. Look at Yom Kippur. All of a sudden, we had a 4-hour break. I mean, for years, I had to hear from the wardens, we don't want to have a break. We don't want people to go home. We want to be able to literally run from Minchen. I'll never forget the past, not this past, but the previous year, Yom Kippur, before the pandemic. I'll never forget the moment. We have this beautiful Chazan Simon Cohen. Soon as Musaf was over, announcement, Mincha in 5 minutes. And all you can think is, oh my gosh, that's the way it was. It doesn't have to be that way. We can cut services shorter. People will be more appreciative. And I'm going to go on the record to say, I'd rather have an 1.5-hour service and an 1.5-hour Kiddush than a 2.5-hour service and a 1/2-hour Kiddush.
Or to build on what you're saying, and here we go off on a real tangent, but we could not be more aligned here. Or we have a 1.5-hour service, and then we have some learning, and we have a longer shir, and we have and we have some children's activities, and then we have our lovely Kiddush at the end of it. And there's still time for all of that, and it presses all the buttons, right? And there's plenty of opportunity, and we have a hook now. We have a moment. When we reopen, things will feel a bit fresh, and we have a moment to do things differently. And I'm so determined that we don't lose that moment. So you heard it here first.
I'm the rabbi. You're the one advocating for the shir. I want the longer Kiddush, but there you go.
Let's think more. Well, I was going to get on to Kiddush, actually. So I was going to just talk more broadly, actually, about community, because community life is all built around social connections, eating together, learning together, but schmoozing, and all of that has been taken away over the last, certainly in person, over the last 10 months. But for example, our chesed activity has been greater than ever. I'm interested, what have you learned from that? Have we managed without the schmooze, and have we replaced it with other things?
I think the chesed that has been exemplified throughout this period has been absolutely astounding, literally and utterly astounding. People who find themselves in a more fortuitous position suddenly realize, I'm not here just for myself. I want to be able to give for the sake of others. Just randomly, by way of example, in our community, there is a whole group of women that come together literally every single week into our kitchens, socially distant, and they're doing all kinds of cooking for the broader United Synagogue Chesed program. It's headed up by Michelle Levy and Dalia Resnick and a whole team of others. I don't know all the names. They come in, they start literally preparing all the incredible food, and it gets distributed all around, not just within Mill Hill, but elsewhere. And that in itself is something that didn't happen before, never existed before. It didn't need to happen maybe before, but now it's there and it's available for the so many who otherwise don't have access to food and whatnot. And then even the financial help. There's a member of our community in Mill Hill who I never heard of before, and he wouldn't typically be a shul goer, but he suddenly reached out, and literally last week, in response to a letter of mine alerting to the community to know that if you need financial help or any other kind of help, it's here for you, etc. I subsequently Googled him, and there's a whole unique profile on him online in numerous places, because he started off in a very high position in a very prominent company, and then broke ranks, set up on his own at the time in natural gases and whatnot, but ultimately made a real success of himself. And he reached out just simply saying, I want to be able to help. Tell me what kind of needs you have in the community in terms of literal, practical, financial need. I want to step in. I want to be able to do it. And today, literally today, he forwarded a lump sum of some sort to be able to do a monthly payment to a particular young family who are currently in need of help, etc. So the chesed that has been forthcoming in so many different ways from so many different people, bigger or smaller, it's not what we're measuring over here. It doesn't matter. It's relative to what each person can manage, has been absolutely astounding and absolutely awe-inspiring. And I can only but hope that obviously it'll continue I dare say this. I think we're only now just at the tip of the iceberg insofar as people's needs, because right now we're in the midst of the pandemic and there's a whole furlough system, et cetera. But when the cards do come tumbling down post-pandemic, and it might be 6 months afterwards or a year afterwards, and so many more are laid off, and I hope I'm wrong, and I hope that doesn't happen, and I hope it's a V economy recovery rather than anything else. There's going to be a lot more help that's still going to be required, and it has instilled in me on one level certainly an incredible amount of faith in people and humanity and the kindness and the tzedakah that lies at the core of every Jewish heart.
So I would agree. I think the experience that you're describing in Mill Hill, and I have seen images or pictures of the cooking, and is reflected across the United Synagogue. So people's capacity to give and to volunteer is immense. And when there've been calls for deliveries, for shopping, for befriending, for clothes and toiletries collections, things for the asylum seekers, even for like night card, like some communities have run intergenerational programs where the children make cards or write letters to older members in the community. People have come forward consistently, and these are people who might not have attended another program at the shul, but have been driven to participate in community life in this way. It's the way it speaks to their Jewish values. It's an expression of their Jewish values, I suppose. And I suppose we all share the same hope that this is something that's maintained. Certain things have happened that probably should always have happened, and maybe they always happen in Mill Hill, so it's certainly not a comment on Mill Hill, but many shuls made the commitment to phone all their members, or to regularly phone all their members, or phone all members over 70, let's say. And it's been appreciated so highly, the regularity of those conversations, the opportunity to talk to somebody, the opportunity to ask a question. Sometimes there were shul matters that somebody had just never bothered to sort out, and they came out, or they were able to ask for some help. And it seems to me, well, that's what shul's about. And we all know that only a small percentage of our members turn up to shul on a regular basis. And yet we owe it to our full membership to show that we're there. And I really do hope that with the relationships that have been built up between members over this time, we'll continue to kind of, those bonds will have stayed. I mean, on a personal level, we did something here where we delivered parcels for Shavuot and for Rosh Hashanah, and to local doorsteps. And once you've met the people that live nearby, well, those relationships are there to stay. And for me, those are some of the building blocks of a community. So I do feel optimistic about that.
I only wonder about one thing, because let's just look at Washington last week. Again, during the first lockdown, it was my fundamental belief, and I actually did ask this question of former Prime Minister Tony Blair, and I did an interview with him about, people talk about the new normal. Do you think there'll be a paradigm shift in mankind, if you will, the mentality, et cetera? And he said, to a certain degree, and very much in line with what you, Joe, just said, to a certain degree, much of what we have suddenly started to implement, maybe we will stay and remain focused on, et cetera. But, I'm always reminded of that famous story of Maimonides, who was challenged by a group of doctors about whether or not you can change animals' nature. And ultimately, they were insistent that you could. He maintained that ultimately you can't. An animal is an animal at the core, and that's just the way it is. And to illustrate the point, when it came to the final day of the contest, in fact, if he was going to lose, Maimonides would have to step down from his position as chief physician to the Zen Sultan. And they had a whole banquet that was catered by cats that were literally walking on their hind legs, carrying all sorts of delicacies and trays and whatnot. And they were looking smugly at Rambam, at Maimonides, saying, look what we've trained them to do. First there was the hors d'oeuvre, then there was the main course, and then the grand finale, dessert. And during the dessert, as the cats all came marching in some unique formation that they had trained them to do, Maimonides just simply smiled, opened up a little box out of which jumped a mouse. And all of a sudden, all those cats just went utterly ballistic, dropped their trays, spilled everything everywhere, and they all went in pursuit of that one particular mouse, which means, I dare say, an animal remains an animal. And to some extent, and forgive the parallel or the analogy, but when you watch what happened last week in Washington, you have to ask yourself, my goodness, so much suffering, so much death, so much economic meltdown, et cetera. And yet human nature is that the beast is released, and ultimately they're back doing all the kinds of crazy that they're doing, with a number of deaths in the process, etc. And you think to yourself, my goodness, it almost makes you want to despair with humanity. So I think it's I don't know, to some extent people will change. Communally, we will be much more alert to the broader things that we have to do. Individually, I would only hope, and I could only but hope, that people who will have felt that greater sense of vulnerability over this period of time will appreciate life a little bit more, and also therefore approach it and tackle it a little bit differently or more altruistically.
Yeah, I understand. I understand the kind of the wariness or the fear that might, you know, and there must be a role for us as Jews, as individuals, as communities, in pushing forward the message of altruism and thinking of others. There's something else I wanted to actually. It's from my, I suppose, from my vantage point working with. I work most closely with honorary officers and rabbis and rabbis over this time, and it's a different type of volunteering. But those that have been working at the heart of running communities over this time have worked absolutely flat out, without a break, flat out. Although there have been many people who've been volunteering in Chesed to keep the group of people that have been keeping the shul going in most shuls, and I can't speak for Mill Hill, but in most shuls has shrunk, because when your decisions have to keep changing, when you always have to keep remaking your plans, you don't have time for consultation and bringing people with you and discussions. You just have to go. And I will say that I am in awe of the shul leadership teams over this time. And there's a professional endeavor, which are rabbinic teams, and then the wonderful people that work in our offices. But our volunteers who have done this, who have found time to do this, I think are absolutely extraordinary and are probably flat out. And there is something in my mind that and I am worried. I'm worried about what happens next and where we find the next cohort of volunteers, because I suspect that many people will have been exhausted from this experience. But that's, I don't know, there might be some nodding head. I'm not going to catch anyone's eye on this call to see whether they're nodding away or not. I wanted to just ask a question, yes, about the role of the rabbi. We've talked a bit about that already, but and you've talked about digging deep and being creative. Do you think there's any permanent change there? Do you think you will go back to what was, or the role has changed, and of the Rebbetzin has changed in some way?
Well, for a start, for the many who always ask, so what does a rabbi do all day? Well, maybe now they get to appreciate it a little bit more. And albeit that this time and throughout this period it's been online, that's a lot of the stuff that happens behind the scenes, obviously, when we are live as well. Has the role changed? Well, for a start, I think that we have to think carefully and consider how it's not like when we go back to normal, we go back to normal as per what you said earlier, the old normal. No, we're going to maintain a new normal, which means certain things should continue online. We have to find the right sort of balance. Why shouldn't there be a Kabbalat Shabbat online whilst also being live in shul? So in other words, by definition, if shul's going to be at 4 o'clock, for argument's sake, why shouldn't they do a Kabbalat Shabbat at 3 o'clock and then go to shul for 4 o'clock? For the many who might otherwise anyway not typically come to shul on a Friday night. It's not because the pandemic ends that a number of our online events have to necessarily end. Granted, yes, you're going to bring in a speaker at shul to broadcast that on Zoom, would it be a bit self-defeating? Often you're dependent on people coming in, ticket sales, and whatever else besides. But for a whole range of other things, why would I necessarily want to give a shiur once a week in shul for 10 people when I can give a shiur online for 50 people? Because it's a lot easier to attend a shiur when you're sitting on your chair eating your dinner in your pajamas. Or maybe both. Do one evening live in shul and another evening online. I think that the new normal is going to necessitate the rabbi recognizing that there's a lot more to do, to expend therefore more energy of effectively doing certain things online and certain things live. And so, for example, even when it comes to Rosh Hashanah. So in the past, Rosh Hashanah wasn't shul. You want to hear shofar, you come to shul. Going forward, you want to hear shofar, you come to shul. And for the many who aren't in shul, okay, I'm not going to make 19 stops, but I'll make 1 or 2 stops for the many who might otherwise not make it to Shul, and blow the shofar for them there instead. Have two collective stops for the benefit of others. So again, it means, again, expending a little bit more energy on that basis. Will that in turn cause some not to want to come to Shul because, hey, I only come for the shofar and now I can hear it in the park by the rabbi later on? I don't know. By and large, I think most people still prefer to come to Shul, but I think that's where we're going to have to start thinking a little bit out of the box. And so too, with regard to some of the other chagim as well. We did a regular Hanukkah lighting in the Mill Hill Square for the last couple of years. And again, last year, Hanukkah lighting in the square, fine, it was just after the fall of Corbin. Many people felt proud, and we had about 300-400 people. But 400 people is still not the same as 1,000 people as we reached out to this year with a somewhat smaller menorah in the back of a truck. So yes, one night in the square, and maybe another 2 nights still bringing it out to the people. And I think that's where there will be that, that broader considerable shift. And I would actually dare say and admit to the fact that whereas a lot of the welfare stuff I left in the main to Chani, and where I needed to get involved, I got involved. Now I found myself a lot more directly involved, going with her, again, as even today, to this elderly woman, and thank goodness I did, because of that walker getting through the window, etc. So I found myself doing a lot more of that, and it gives you, admittedly, a certain extra satisfaction in just putting an extra smile on that person's face, even if when she greets me, she says, "Hello, Chazan." She's never heard me sing.
I think I'd really like to disagree. There's a problem here, by the way, in that I'm sure we should have had like a debate. I mean, I should have said I absolutely disagree with your perspective, but the problem is that I do agree. I'm worried. As someone who is involved in rabbinic recruitment and supports community defining rabbi, I am worried about that the role of the rabbi has grown and grown and grown. That now our rabbonim are doing exactly, particularly where there's only one rabbi in a community, they're doing exactly as you say. They're doing an online service, and then they're doing an in-person service. They're going out of the building, and they'll be doing in the building. There's no doubt that we will be doing hybrid, exactly as you say, online and in-person, in shul for membership outreach, and that's going to significantly increase our rabbinic workload, and we're going to have to work out, therefore, what are the priorities, and maybe some things in terms of some of the more traditional responsibilities of the rabbi. I don't know what those are, can't point to them now, but maybe they will become diminished. I don't know.
So why are you worried?
It's an engaging job. We have created a new and engaging role. I want to make sure that they're enough hours in the day.
Well, I'm going to say this, for better or for worse, but I'll say it anyway. When I came to Mill Hill, my first interview, where there was a majority vote in my favor, but some wariness about me being Chabad, which prompted an overthrow of the board, such that there was now a new board who wanted to meet me. When I came to that board, I addressed them and went straight to the core to explain what it is that Chabad represents. And essentially, as I explained to them, it's not a job, it's a passion, it's a way of life. And with that comes a certain kind of indefatigable energy, which is what motivates a person to walk the 13 miles in Rosh Hashanah, because you know that's really what you need to do. Bring your Yiddishkeit out to your community, take the shul out to the community. So I appreciate what you're saying, and it can be a little bit difficult at times. And if you find that the rabbis are overstretching themselves, by all means, encourage the United Synagogue to give us all raises. I won't object to that. But ultimately, it's part and parcel of what the role is. And I think the more we reach out and the more that we apply our energies into inspiring the community, the more enthused and the more energized we ourselves become in the process. It makes us into better people and better rabbis.
And this makes sense. And from a community point of view, everything that you have said, it's been an interesting point, going back to one of the points you made earlier about outreach, is since this point about shuls being based both kind of batei tefillah, places of prayer, but also community centers, has been with the United Synagogue for a long time, and we're very good at doing that. You know, our shuls host shirim and cookery classes and knitting groups and yoga and art classes and all of that alongside everything else, and of course shirim and lectures and educational things. And it's a strategy that worked, but I think we've always known, if we were honest, we've known that attracts a group of people, and that creates lots of access points, so it creates a wider group of people than the people that will come for services. But there's plenty of people that won't cross the threshold of a shul. They won't do it because they're not comfortable, they're socially kind of awkward or unsure whether they'll be made to feel welcome. Maybe they don't see themselves reflected in the other people that are on site. And then programs like yours, the stuff that's happened in the street, the shofar blowing, and the many other things that have happened in gardens or treasure hunts and trails for kids or deliveries or doorstep chats, all of those things have shown that people are very happy to engage outside of the building. And we mustn't anchor ourselves to that community center idea. We've got to break down those walls and get out there, because that's where we as you say, I'm going back, circling right back to what you said at the beginning, but we meet people where they are. I'm looking at the time, and I really did want this to be a bit of a conversation. So Rabbi, should we open it up for some questions and comments?
Yes, if there are any questions or comments, please feel free to unmute yourself and feel free to express or ask whatever it is that you want. Before you do, actually, Joe, I'm going to ask you the first question because somebody sent this to me just before we began tonight. Please ask Joe why it is that only 8, and I quote, why only 80% of shuls are closed? How come the other 20% haven't been shut down in the current circumstances as well?
Yeah, is that a nice, easy question? I say that lightly, but obviously this is a situation that we're evaluating daily and rigorously. Why are shuls not shut down? For several reasons. What we did is, until about a month ago, we had a set policy and we said, here's the central policy, shuls follow this policy, as we open, as we close, as we have masks, we don't have masks, whatever it is, you follow the policy. And then about a month ago, as things started to, as infection rates rose, and different communities were responding in different ways, we had a change in policy, and we said that local shuls should make the decisions themselves based on their population and the feelings in their communities, because communities respond to these situations quite differently. And so you'll have seen that over time, as you say, 80% of our shuls have closed. Every time they've closed, we've spoken to them, we've supported that decision, we've worked out what their reopening criteria might be. It's not kind of happened without us. The shuls that remain open, well, first of all, the government allows places of worship to remain open. We've seen the data from NHS Test and Trace and the ONS studies that show that transmission of COVID in places of worship is extremely low. And actually all reports of COVID cases in the United Synagogue come to me, as in when a member has had COVID. And thank God, as far as we know, there might have been asymptomatic cases, but as far as we know, there hasn't been transmission in any of our shuls. Thank God, as far as we know. That doesn't mean they're 100% safe, but what I'm just saying is, in terms of the data that has come from ONS and from our own data, that's the case. In addition, we regularly take advice from senior people in Public Health England, who again have said, even in the light of the new variant, or the measures that we have in place, and you'll have noticed we've now dramatically reduced capacity. So in a shul like Norris Lee, they've got 35 people attending. Edgware also very low attendance. The big shuls are open, and then the attendance is very low. So the risk is minimal. Does that mean that we might not shut shuls? No, it might be that there is a change of policy, but as it is today, it's still a local decision.
So rumors about divided opinion at the helm are grossly exaggerated. It's okay, you don't have to comment on that.
There are multiple stakeholders. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, any questions from any of you out there? Charles, go ahead.
Hi there. So a lot of you probably expecting me to comment on some of what's been said tonight. Rabbi Schochet was being exceptionally generous before, because when he spoke about somebody banging on the bimmer and Yom Kippur saying 5 minutes till Mincha, he was talking about me probably. But I am one of those people who on Yom Kippur this year absolutely hated the fact that there was a huge break. And I just think, for me personally, it wrecked Yom Kippur. And even though I tend to, I think I've agreed with nearly the vast majority of everything you've both said tonight. The one thing I take issue with is I actually think when shuls reopen properly and everyone comes flooding back, I think the length of services will probably snap back more or less to what it was. Looking around at who's been coming to shul over the past year, well, 10 months or so, it's the same faces. And the fact is, the vast majority of the community, in my opinion, haven't experienced this kind of service. This kind of service that we've been running over the past 10 years is not what people expect. And I don't say it's no disrespect to anybody. I know the vast majority who are here tonight are from Mill Hill, so I feel fairly confident to say this and not offend too many people. And sorry to anyone who's not a Mill Hill Shul member. One of the things that I've learned over lockdown, and I'm appreciating about our own shul, is the standard and the quality of davening that we have. Because I've tuned in sometimes, or I've watched back after Shabbos of the general US Kabbalat Shabbat. And I personally think the standard we have is head and shoulders above some of the people that have been offered. And we are a shul, sorry if this is going on a bit, we are a shul who have a lot of members across the spectrum who appreciate good davening. We don't have a fuddy-duddy old choir. We have a youngish choir who are popular. Our families, even throughout lockdown, email me saying, can we book them yet for when we come back? And I'm quite confident that things will snap, the length of services will snap back to what they were, because I think those that come typically enjoy them. That's the only thing I've really disagreed on.
All right. Well, first of all, Joe, just to give you context, Charles has been our indefatigable warden. I mean, he's been warden, I believe, now for about 13 years, and has worked tirelessly, particularly when we were open during the actual lockdown, quite considerably so. Charles, I will only say this, that when Krinsky and Goldberg used to meet up regularly every Shabbos on the golf course, for a while there, Goldberg stopped coming, and Krinsky suddenly saw him one day and said, where have you been? He said, I started to go to shul. He goes, you? You're the furthest thing from an observant person. Why on earth are you going to shul? He says, well, you remember Rakovsky, the guy who moved from Russia, and he had nothing, and all of a sudden he became a mega millionaire? And he attributes that to going to shul. So Krinsky looks to Goldberg and says, and don't tell me you believe that nonsense. No way do you believe that nonsense. Come on, you're closer to a communist than a religious person. He says, do you go to shul and you want to tell me you go to shul to talk to God as well? He says, no. Rakovsky goes to shul to talk to God. I go to shul to talk to Rakovsky. So yes, shul will go on, and maybe things will extend out a little bit more, but maybe we'll have to reach a compromise if you continue to stay on as warden, and we'll cut it from 11:45 to 11:30, because there are always bits and pieces that do get unnecessarily schlepped. But I take the point. People do like to come to shul, and maybe, as you rightly say, they didn't experience the shortened or abridged version of service, but it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't figure out how we might be able to make the service a little
bit. I'm sure there will be compromises along the way, but I just I just see the practicalities. And when we have a bar mitzvah week, and when all the guests come in, and how it is, and you know what the chazanim are like, and it will just, in my opinion, will go back. I might be wrong. We will.
Fair enough.
We'll see.
Time will tell.
Well, I look forward to hearing the outcome of that. That sounds fascinating. I will be following this closely. I think is always the thing. There is a balance, of course, between familiarity and tradition, which is why people come to shul. They want to experience what they've always experienced, and remembering that there are lots of people who aren't in the room at all, and how we engage those people that never come in the first place. So it's a tough one. Charles, because you've spoken and it looks like it's the end of the session, but I just wanted to note that we had an interesting conversation about youth a few weeks ago, and I didn't say that, and I think this is very important. If there was one challenge, a real challenge that I don't think we've got our heads around yet, it's our teenagers who haven't, across the board, engaged in community life, and that we've broken a kind of a routine and a connection there, and there's some serious work that needs to be done to address that.
You know my feelings on that.
Yeah.
But I will actually agree with that. That's absolutely true. We need to figure out more about how we're going to deal with that, because that has been a very neglected part of the community, certainly during this period of lockdown. I will only add to this part of the conversation to say that even I figured out how I can cut my sermons from 12 minutes to about 7-8 minutes. And that's all part of my new normal. Any other questions? Don't be shy.
Well, I'd just like to tell Mrs. Grose that, quote from Kohelet, there is nothing new under the sun. One of the forms of the new services that she was envisaged, exactly what we used to have in the unfortunately discontinued Hashkoma service, a short service, a short Kiddush, and then learning. That's exactly what we used to have, and it's very much missed. But I must ask Rabbi Schochet, what's worrying me? What's going to happen about Parsha Zochar and also the Megillah? I mean, that's what's concerning me. I don't know, because what's worrying me is a lot of our most distinguished members died, and I think it's probably related to the Megillah service, because I think I caught coronavirus there.
Yeah, okay, so let me come back to that at that particular point. First of all, David, and he's one of our Balei Kara, I would stress that in light of this conversation, David, as you have now learned to do, you'll have to lane a lot quicker, even when we get back to normal, because now you know you can. But that aside, it's true. It's been playing on my mind. We're all considering what we're going to do. The London Beth Din have given us a certain particular directive, which we'll be sharing out in due course with regards to Purim, and they will be sending us directive with regard to Zohar as well. I've been mindful of the fact that even if in theory shuls are open, I think Purim is going to be, for me, and maybe thank God it's a Friday this year, it's supposed to be the happiest day of the year. It'll be a particularly traumatic day for me, because I will reflect back on the fact that many of our beautiful members got sick as a direct result of Purim last year when we didn't have clear government directive. And unfortunately, a number of them sadly passed away over the next few weeks that followed thereafter. And it just makes one all that much more wary about what we're going to do this year for Purim. So we are exploring options. We are exploring halachic options. There is already directive from the Beth Din vis-a-vis the usage of Zoom as essentially what is considered a lack of other alternative. So we'll probably be doing something on Zoom. We might well be doing something that will involve, again, driving around to certain neighborhoods. A lot of that will be contingent on whatever government directive will be at that point. I know I've heard from enough doctors and others that they genuinely believe will still certainly be, if not like this, then in a tier 3 type of situation. Who knows? We can only but hope that things will start getting better. So all I can say is, David, watch this space, and obviously we'll keep you properly informed. We'll take, I think, Joe, you'll take one more question.
Could I ask a question, Rabbi? I'm not from your community, but it was a much broader based question. You know, out of every disaster, there springs forth opportunities. And I see that what this pandemic has done has accelerated a lot of things that needed to happen, both within shul communities and in wider communities as well. One of the most interesting features for me has been the number of new faces or unfamiliar faces who have joined in community life through Zoom, for whom shuls were inaccessible and not relevant. And I think the trick for us as a broad community is to how to maintain that virtual community and how to turn that virtual community into a physical community. For years, we've looked at different methods of outreach. And I don't think we've done it very smartly. We haven't used our best ambassadors to reach out into the deeper parts of our community and bring people in. We've used quite primitive techniques. However, with technology and what we have available to us now, and I speak as someone who runs a very, very large virtual community and has spent many years perfecting how to bring those people into the physical world, I think there are things we can learn about how we can grow the United Synagogue. We haven't had a sustained period of growth for many, many years. And this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually leverage what's happened and to grow our communities. I think the youth problem that you've raised is a particular issue. And I think just looking at the crowd here tonight, you can see how few younger members of the community are present. So there's a real challenge there. But I think we have to look imaginatively and creatively at how we turn that newly engaged virtual community into a bigger community that's physical and virtual for the longer term.
Joe?
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether this was hello, Gary. I don't know.
Hello.
I'm happy to give an initial response to that. It's interesting that you link the virtual and the young people, because our experience has been that whilst we've had lots of success virtually, whilst at the beginning that attracted young people, over time they dropped off, and so we've had a broad virtual engagement with members and with non-members, and that's been really deliberate, right? I mean, different shuls will do different things, but United Synagogue is trying to make USTV as open as it possibly can, so that we're getting views from all over the place, because it's an outreach tool. But we have found that young people haven't been engaging virtually. Where we found that younger people, and we all define young people differently, don't we? But let's say people in their 20s and 30s, those who are single and those who are married with children, but they've engaged to a greater extent with some outdoor, with families, some kind of outdoor activities, but through volunteering. And I think that, I mean, this is my take on these things, is that this is about empowerment, that the communities that are successful in engaging new groups enable these groups to do things their own way, to say, why not set up? How would you like to do it? Why not run with it? And not force them into the existing structure, but set up a structure alongside them. And we've seen some communities where that's really worked. So I think that would be the strategy that I would employ, rather than that sense that we have to kind of get them over the bridge into shul as we know it, rather just encourage community life to run in the way that they would like. Yeah. But I will go back to the teenage thing. I don't have the answer to that. I'm just going to
I don't, to be fair, and I wasn't restricting my comments to young people. But if we want to attract young people, we've got to use the right language. USTV is not the right language, for example, unfortunately. You know, we've got to understand where young people are in social media and what they're using. But yeah, I think the broader point is about, I don't care what age of people we bring in. I just want to see the US on a growth trajectory again, and I see this as a tremendous opportunity. We have shown that things have changed. And just a minor point on prayer, I don't want to monopolize, but on prayer, it's changed my view. I have to say, I've probably been more attentive, more loyal, daven with more kavana online, where I've found some peace and quiet, than in a shul environment. So for me, it's the opposite of rushing back to shul. I've actually enjoyed the space, the private space, that I've been able to make, but I may be quite different from others in that respect. I don't know. Anyway, I've said enough. Sorry.
Well, I'll agree with you. We have to start speaking kids' language. So we have to encourage the kids and make them realize that US TV is lit. I mean, it's really sick and dope, if you know what I'm saying.
Brilliant. I think we run obviously we have something called Young US, which works with young people, but we also encourage nascent communities to form under a banner that we have community potential. And there we don't do anything in a building, we do everything in coffee shops and parks and in people's homes, and that's the way that we find that we build trade, through relationships. Everybody on this call already knows that community is built through genuine relationships, and actually programming is an aside to that, and social media is just a means of enabling people to connect, but that's how you successfully build community life.
And I'm going to just finish on a positive note, if I may, on my part, and just quote Paul Fecher, who messaged me and actually said, next Rosh Hashanah, there will not be an empty seat in Shul. And here's, all I can say is to that is, as they like to say in the UK, hear, hear.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join Mill Hill and others tonight. I'm always, can I add something by saying, we're thinking an awful lot about these questions. You know, we will have to continue to think about COVID guidance and what next and the next stage of opening and all of that. But the really interesting conversation, they're critical and essential and top of the list, but the really interesting stuff is what we're talking about tonight. So if people have views and they want to share, you can find my email online or reach me through the US. I'm always interested in listening to people and hearing your experiences and taking new ideas on board. And I take your point, David, that there is nothing new under the sun. Of course, I know that, but we can't stop trying. So, yeah.
Joe, thank you so much for coming along tonight, not just actually for coming along tonight, but for actually everything you do behind the scenes in steering us generally as the United Synagogue, but also particularly during these rather turbulent times. And here's to a better tomorrow with a new normal. Absolutely. And a shorter service. I wish you all a good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.